Hello Year 11, welcome to today's session. So today's session we are going to do a bit of a recap of the conflict and tension GCSE unit. You could start by doing the multiple choice knowledge quiz which is on the Google form, but this is not compulsory. So let's look at the conflict and tension course of 1918 to 1939. So this unit is divided effectively into three sections. We start off with looking at peacemaking. So we look at the Treaty of Versailles, which is signed in 1919, which formally ends the First World War. Remember, Germany had surrendered and signed an armistice in November 1918, but it's the full terms of the peace treaty which are not finalised or announced until June 1919. And this is the document that officially ends the war. Now, the talks for the peace treaty were known as the Paris Peace Conference, and the treaty which dealt with Germany was called the Treaty of Versailles. Now, remember, there are some other treaties that go on and deal with some of the other countries, but we don't look at those in too much depth. Now, as I said last session, the Treaty of Versailles is seen as quite harsh. Many felt that the treaty is being forced on Germany because they were not allowed to have a role in the negotiations. They were simply given the document and told to sign it. It's why it's often known as a diktat or dictated peace. So remember, our big three, so Britain, France, and America, are heavily involved in these negotiations. And something which comes out of the negotiations is the League of Nations. Now, the League of Nations forms the second part of this unit. It's an international organisation which brought together different countries. It starts with 42 states in 1920. And the idea was that it would grow and include as many countries as possible over time. Now, the League have four main aims. They want to keep the peace and prevent war. They want to facilitate disarmament. So basically, they want everybody to reduce the amount of weapons they have. They also want to improve working and living conditions and to help end deadly diseases around the world. This is one of the reasons they set up all those agencies to try and have an impact on people's lives. Now, the League have to deal with lots of problems and they have varying levels of success. Remember, America decided not to join, which is a bit of a problem, particularly when they have to deal with bigger problems like Manchuria and Abyssinia crisis, which they don't handle particularly well. Some historians view the League as a group who are very easy to push over with limited resources to actually achieve anything. Remember, they have some steps that they try and follow. They start off by having talks and effectively telling off other countries going, don't do that. We then can move to things like fining and stopping trade from going from one country to another. They can also bring in the army. However, they don't have their own army. They are reliant on the member states providing them with soldiers. Now, this causes a bit of a problem, particularly as many of these countries simply don't want to supply troops. And so some historians think that they had limited resources. They couldn't actually really achieve anything when it came to preventing conflict. And the final part of this unit looks at the road to war. So Hitler comes to power in 1933 after the Great Depression had hit Germany particularly hard. The Nazis used their tactics of propaganda and campaigning, targeted discrimination to get into power. And this is where the Germany unit and the conflict and tension unit really link together really well. We can see that Hitler's main goals were to undo the Treaty of Versailles, to rearm Germany and restore its pride as a military nation. He wants to expand the living space for Germans to grow. And he wants to unite all German-speaking people under one country, effectively creating a greater Germany. Now, this links in really nicely with the source from the last session. He also wants to destroy communism. Remember, communism is a huge concern for the Allied nations. It's one of the reasons why they follow the policy of appeasement in the first place, because they want to keep Hitler on their side just in case anything happens with Russia, so that Germany can act as a buffer zone. So we look at how Hitler tries to achieve those aims through a series of events. So we look at the Saar plebiscite in January 1935, the fact that he rearms in March 1935, which goes against the Treaty of Versailles, the same as the remilitarization of the Rhineland. We look at the union with Austria, so Anschluss in March 1938, again, something he was not supposed to do under the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. We look at his gradual increase in invading countries, so things like the Sudeten crisis and the invasion of Czechoslovakia. You can then look at the Nazi-Soviet Pact of August 1939, which was of huge concern to the Allied countries. And before finally we have the invasion of Poland in September 1939, which then started World War II. So your tasks for this session. Again, we have a timeline for this course. For each of the events, you need to decide whether this event is to do with invasion or whether it involves Germany. Now, there are some events that will need more than one colour, others that will have no colour whatsoever. If you can't colour code using the highlighting tool, if you're doing it on the Google Doc, you can simply come up with your own key. Then your second task is, at what point on the timeline do you think another war was inevitable? So when was war always going to happen? Again, there is no right answer. Be specific. So if you think a war was always going to happen in, say, 1933 at the disarmament conference, or maybe you think that actually it was March 1938 when Hitler invaded Austria, then you need to make sure that you tell us that on the document. You need to explain your answer in full sentences, ensuring that you are giving evidence to back up your answer. Your next tasks are to explain why these events would worry the Allied countries. So you're using the second timeline, which is a little bit more detailed and focused on the specific events from 1938 and 1939 in the build-up to the Second World War. So make sure that for task 3, you are looking at these 5 events and deciding why they would worry the Allied countries. So why would Britain, France, and America be concerned about this? For task 4, use the same 5 events and the short clip on BBC Bitesize to decide if Hitler always wanted war. Again, this is your opinion. So make sure that you are explaining your ideas. Now you can do this on the Google Doc, or you can do this in your summer workbook. And your final task for this session is an account question. So write an account of how Hitler's actions in 1938 to 1939 led to the outbreak of war. It's an 8-mark question, so we are looking for 3 paragraphs. Remember, an account question, you need to write in chronological order. So you need to write about the events in the order that they happen, explaining each event and saying how they led to war. So, for example, you could decide that paragraph 1, you are going to start with Hitler's actions in Austria in 1938, so the Anschluss, and then explain how that led to war. You can then move on and do paragraph 2 on Hitler's actions in Czechoslovakia in the Sudetenland crisis. And then paragraph 3 could be Hitler's actions in Poland and explain how that eventually led to World War II. Use those 5 events on the detailed timeline. You've got 3 columns. The third column in particular will be really useful for this question. Once you have finished everything, if you have done it on the Google Doc, please make sure you submit it on the Google Classroom. If you've done it in your workbook, well done. Please take care of yourselves, and we will see you really soon.